So now we move on to the second part of our program, and we are all seeing our cities changing and growing before our very eyes. And we really are at the precipice of an opportunity to build our community for the future. And here to reflect on what we have just heard from Spencer and all that great data we just listened to, I would like to introduce our panel for today. We have Jane Broom from Microsoft, Ed Fries from One Up Ventures, Debbie Lacey from Eastside for All, Louis Rudd from Azel's Famous Chicken, Matt Wilson from Meta's Reality Lab Research, and to moderate the discussion, the publisher of the Puget Sound Business Journal, Don Baker. Don, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Christina. It's great to be here today, and I look forward to the conversation this morning with each of you as well. So let's go ahead and kick things off. So we have a question for each of you to address, and that is really, what has surprised you the most about the past year? Jane, would you like to take that first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, everybody. And boy, that was a data-packed presentation we just saw, and incredible information. I'm excited to hopefully get that in a PowerPoint so I can kind of dive into it and learn a little bit more. You know, I think in the last year, I guess what I will talk more about is the incredible collaboration that took place amongst the business community, the nonprofit community, the public sector, to basically rally and do whatever was possible to get us through the last couple of years. And so that was everything from, you know, responding to calls for PPE, to setting up vaccine clinics, to getting signs on buses, to free rides to your vaccine appointment, like everything. That it was sort of one of those moments of all hands on deck, and the way the people of this community responded was pretty incredible. And, you know, as a global company, we sort of see what's happening around the world. And, you know, honestly, I could not be more proud of the giving, the collaboration, the all hands on deck, just the fortitude of this region over the last 2 years. So that, I guess that's mine.
Great. Debbie, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. I guess for me, the real surprise, of course, came 2 years ago at this time. Who would have thought that we would be doing all this on Zoom and doing everything that was just mentioned that we all managed to do? So I don't think that the last year surprised me all that much, but I will say of note, just to echo what was just said, an incredible amount of affirming that what we're capable of in times of need and crisis as a community. And I certainly saw that amongst my peers and colleagues in the nonprofit community-based organization world. Just a tremendous heart, people doing more with not enough, and really stepping up in ways that they hadn't been before, and the stretch required for that, you know, on all of our parts. I think that was of note in the past year for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Louis, looking back on the past year, what has surprised you the most?
I didn't anticipate, first of all, that the pandemic would be extended as long as it was. And then to be on this side of it, and it appears that we are on the other side of it now and moving forward. And, you know, to see how everyone came together, there was definitely some challenges and some chaos and some confusion, but to have come together in a way that allowed us to get through it, where some were impacted more negatively than others, but we got through it. And I do think that we're on the other side of it. And I'm surprised that, you know, we are still doing as well as we are, given the circumstances that we were faced with overall.
Yeah, I know we all definitely hope we're on the other side of it. So I definitely agree with you on that.
We're gonna
Matt, share
claim
with us. Yeah.
We're going to claim that.
Matt, your thoughts on the past year?
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone here on kind of both the surprise on how long it's taken. I think we all thought we might be back in the office last year, and we're even preparing for that. I think other surprises are really around the push for continued innovation. I know I was surprised when I was working at Facebook and all of a sudden I was working at Meta. So, and the big focus towards innovation, towards the metaverse. And so I think that, things are changing, and the pandemic and other things really kind of affected how we look at work now and how we move forward with innovation. And, that affects everybody in the community where we live. And so I think, that was probably a big shock to me, but I think, I'm looking forward to that recovery that's coming, that's just around the corner. I'm looking forward to getting back into the office and seeing others in the community where I live.
Great. Ed, your biggest surprise?
Yeah, I guess this whole situation pushed people in the game business to be even more creative about how we work. I think there was a feeling that everybody needed to be together in a room to be creative. And once we were pushed to deal with the situation, it turns out that isn't necessarily the case. And there's new tools being created. Of course, Zoom was one that we're on, but more sophisticated tools for creating virtual offices and having people work together, and that are coming, and some of which are coming out of the game business, just like Slack, for example, was created by a game company. So I think we're going to continue to see innovation in sort of virtual work that's going to come out of this. And mostly, I guess I'm just really impressed with the adaptability of people, both in our business, but just in general. I mean, we've all moved to sort of virtual living. I mean, people, ordering things online and trying to support our local businesses best we can.
So moving out of that, but sticking with sort of the virtual world, and coming out of the virtual world, Jane, I'd like to come to you and just, so Microsoft has announced the reopening of its campus. It's a big deal for a lot of people and even other businesses in the area. What can you share with us in terms of how the company is thinking about this next phase?
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, we are very excited to have announced the reopening of campus. It essentially what happens is the campus is fully open on Monday, the 28th. And basically it's about a month-long period of transition to sort of get people, reaffiliated with the campus, the technology, their offices, understanding how their new life is going to be between home and work. But we are pretty excited about it, honestly. We have you just heard about it, an incredible new campus that's going to be open next year. That I think during the process of the last 2 years in the design, this whole notion of hybrid work environments, we have this great opportunity to really learn what that could be. And I think in time for us to think about how the office space might change, and the need for conference rooms to be fully technology efficient and supportive of hybrid meeting times and things like that. We got here to this moment because of the incredible collaboration across the board from, the private sector, the public sector, the residents of our region really working together to make sure that we are safe. I think that's always been our number one priority. I think we are getting there for sure. And it's going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of anxiety about what it means to come back to the office. And we're going to work through that. The company's been amazing about providing, information and supports and materials and things like that, and really understanding that this is going to be a change for people. And all of us as business leaders and community leaders need to be responsive to that. the rule for us is essentially people are being asked to be in the office about 50% of the time or more. And that is completely, you don't need to talk to your manager about that. You have the flexibility to sort of live within that, within that time frame. For some people who do want to work at home more than 50%, we're being, those folks are being asked to work at something out with their manager. That will then, we'll adjust office space and meeting space and those sorts of things around those new numbers. So that's all work ahead for us. But, I think for the surrounding community to the Microsoft campus, so many of you, the small businesses, the nonprofits, the education groups, I think we know how much of an impact our campus has on all of your businesses. And we are delighted to be back. And we'll do all we can to help support, people going back and getting ice cream and getting fried chicken and, getting gasoline and doing all those things that we need to do as a functioning region. So thank you.
Yeah, it definitely has an impact on the community. It's interesting too, the idea of people getting reacclimated to being in an office environment and, the sort of reimagining, rethinking how we use office space and its purpose. That's an interesting aspect. Matt, I'd like to turn to you for a minute. You work on the cutting edge of innovation at Meta Reality Labs Research. So tell us a bit more about what you do, but also what was it like to work remote while trying to be innovative?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I think the first part is I work in AR and VR hardware and software research. And so one of the challenges is research is really kind of a creative endeavor. Like there's a lot of innovation and collaboration that has to happen to develop these breakthroughs. And it's really no different than games to some extent on how we approach it. And I think in some cases it was really difficult because we work with both hardware and software, and in some cases in the software space, working remote or that kind of thing is not as challenging. But on the hardware side, it's very challenging. We can't actually move our labs to homes or that kind of things. And so that did require us to change kind of how we work. And I think that as we're moving back to hybrid, there's new sets of challenges. Right now we're all working through VC and it's equal. The communication bandwidth is effectively equal for everyone. But as we start going back to the office, having that little conversation at the water cooler at lunch, or just walking over someone's desk, or even collaboration becomes way more higher bandwidth effectively. So you can get a lot more communication done at the office. And so that proposes new challenges around including those people, the workforce that has chosen to work from home or may just not be in the office that day. And so as Ed mentioned, there's a lot of new tools we're looking at to help with that collaborative experience and bringing people into the office. But I would say this is a new challenge. Like we are not, that all the tools aren't there yet. And I think that this will require us all to kind of work closely with both our communities and our employees to make sure we're delivering the right pieces for those folks.
Okay, great. And Ed, I want to turn to you for a minute. You manage a venture fund. What has that been like during the pandemic? And what's the appetite for investment in startups and companies in general? And what are some of the opportunities for the East Side there?
Yeah, a few different things. I mean, we started this fund just about a year before the pandemic happened. And we were just kind of getting going when everything changed. But in a way that was helpful for me. I was traveling a lot, and to be able to speak with people all over the world. There, kind of coming into the pandemic, there was this feeling, you had to meet people in person before you invested, and when that was no longer possible, it actually made a lot of us in the venture world more efficient. We were able to get more deals done. And that's actually been going quite well. So that's been good. One thing is our fund is pretty different. We're really focused on building community among founders. And so connecting founders together and creating a space where they can communicate with each other and share and help. And so, at least in the past, communities been about getting people together. You want them to spend time together and build trust with each other, and that's where sharing and helping comes from. And so we've had to do that virtually, and it's I think human beings are social beings, and so there's we can only do so much virtually. I just got back last night from kind of the first big game conference that was done in person in the last 2 years. And it was just great to see people again. For our fund, we had about half a dozen of our portfolio companies there, and we got together and had a dinner, and it was just great to be together again. So, so I think we've made a lot of progress on what we can do virtually, but also there's no replacement for being together as people.
So kind of following up on that, what are your views on kind of the remote work and the sort of return to office, particularly for the gaming industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like there's a little company here called Spry Fox. They're up on the top of Finn Hill here in the Juanita area, and they've been doing remote work for a decade. And I really saw them step up and kind of teach the other guys how to do it. How do you run an organization like this? How do you work for just daily and weekly? How do you, what are your processes that make it work? So they've been great in helping other people learn how to do it. And I think that the thing that's happened now is in some ways we can't go back, because once you're remote, then you start, and you're growing, you start to hire people from all over. And once you do that, you're not going to move them all here. So we're going to, I think pretty much everyone's going to continue in some form of hybrid from now on. And that's allowed us to, pick and choose among the best talent in the world, which is great. But it does make things more complicated.
Definitely. And Louis, I want to turn to you for a minute because obviously the restaurant industry has been particularly hard hit during the pandemic, and not one where people can work remote. And so, first, just how are your restaurants doing, and how is the industry overall doing in terms of recovering from the damage that was suffered during the pandemic?
Well, fortunately, we're doing really well. And from day one, we were fortunate to have a concept that was sort of geared for the situations that were created by the pandemic when people were kind of mandated to stay home and a lot of to-go orders. And we fortunately have partnered with a third-party delivery company. And so we were already equipped with the kind of packaging for to-go services and all that. And initially, it was a shock, and we thought we were in for a rough ride and didn't know how it was going to turn out. But we actually did very well that first year. And then we were wondering, okay, how will it be for the second year? When we thought we would be out of it. And fortunately, again, we were able to do well. And we've also been able to do well with staffing. We haven't had to close any of the stores and alter our hours. I mean, there's been a couple of times when we've been short-staffed and closed earlier, maybe open later, but for the most part, we've been able to maintain. But overall, we're amongst the blessed and so many others that I feel for that didn't have that opportunity and didn't have the kind of resources, didn't make it through. But from what I understand and from those that I've talked to in the industry, the leaders in the industry, we're going to be looking at 2023 before we can begin to see some sort of a normalcy where we can actually predict and count on supplies being available and a stable pricing market. But we just had an example where one of our suppliers where we were getting our chicken chose to downsize, eliminate a lot of the services that they were providing. And we had to move to another source. And that was a scare at the end of the year, we get 3-week notice that, hey, we're not going to be able to supply your chicken. I'm like, we're out of business without chicken. But things are starting to look up and look better. And there's a lot of resources out there that are geared towards helping those in the industry to survive and continually grow.
Well, that's definitely good to hear. Debbie, turning to you, as we've heard, it has been a tale of two recoveries when we look at the level of recovery going on as we emerge from the sort of main part of the pandemic. Can you share with us more about that, and what is the reality for many people not being lifted up by the recovery and sort of the tech boom that's going on now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, we know that times of crisis don't create the disparities, right? They highlight and unfortunately exacerbate them. So from a racial equity and social justice perspective, this tale of two recoveries, not just from the perspective of our tech sector versus non-tech sectors, of course, but more about the very different experiences of our small businesses rooted in the racial and ethnic disparities that Spencer touched on earlier too. So if we look back, prior to the pandemic, nearly 60% of Black-owned businesses were at risk of financial distress. And that was compared to about 27% of white-owned businesses. So, yeah, and we also know that most of our new businesses don't receive funding actually from outside investors. They use equity in their homes to start their businesses. So from 2019, we know that white business owners had almost 5 times the amount of home equity as their Black and Latino counterparts. So we see a lot of these disparities playing out. Black and Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color are less likely to have emergency savings. As a result, they're more often forced to rely on non-business income, such as other family members' income earnings, debt, et cetera. And making those higher interest payments drains their cash at a time when they need it the most. So these disparities are also true for some of our immigrant-owned businesses who may experience language and cultural barriers as well, on top of some of those other systemic challenges. So one of the things that I found recently that was a really interesting perspective and a good one to think about moving forward was put out by McKinsey and Company, and they've shared this report about building a supportive ecosystem for Black-owned businesses. And one of the things that we look at is right now there's a lot of investment in information sharing, training, mentorship, helping individual business owners get loans. All of that is very well and good and much needed. But unfortunately, it tends to perpetuate, if we're just focused on those things, perpetuates the false and harmful notion that challenges can be overcome by addressing the shortcomings of the business owners and their businesses. That is not what we need to be focusing on in the bigger picture. We need institutional and structural changes across all parts of our community so we can all have the benefits and reap the benefits of the opportunities and growth.
So with that Louis, I want to go back to you for a minute and kind of from your perspective, how did the pandemic compound the problem of social and racial inequalities in our communities? And what do you think needs to be done to help that?
Well, first of all, I think there was a very negative impact for a lot of African-American owned businesses, Black owned businesses, and a couple in particular that I was aware of that due to no fault of their own, had to shut their businesses down. And again, operating with low to no income, having to close their doors, were faced with going out of business, which led me to partnering with DoorDash and coming up with an initiative called the Rudd's Rub Initiative, raising up Black businesses and utilizing funds that DoorDash wanted to partner with us to promote Ezell's. And at this time, or during this time, there was a lot of focus and conversations around systemic racism and social inequities. And there are a lot of people out there now that want to really understand what that is and how it has impacted the Black business community and Black businesses in general and people of color. And so DoorDash was one of those that wanted to listen and understand, and then allowed me to divert those funds into the initiative that got it started. And then I shared that with a couple other supplier partners and distributors that we work with, and we were able to raise over $120,000 that we could share with and through grants and awards with some of those small businesses that without that would have closed their doors. For example, the one coffee shop that couldn't pay for the lease payments for the equipment. Without the equipment, he's out of business. Without his business, he has no income, period. But yeah, so the disparities are there. And I'm really pleased with all of the conversations, but I'll be more pleased with action that creates the kind of positive impact. We talk about the investors. We know for a fact that there's less than 5% of the funds through private equity funds and others that goes into the Black community and people of color to invest in their businesses. We faced it firsthand, the redlining, the lack of access to capital. 25 years into our business, we were still having a challenge getting a loan. We currently have 4 restaurants on the east side, but there were landlords at one point that wouldn't accept an application for a lease for their property. And so I see a change taking place right now, but there needs to be a greater change. And I'm happy to see, again, the level of awareness amongst people that really want to have these conversations so they understand how they can be a part of the solution.
And when it comes to investment, you said that you're seeing a bit of a change in that. Are there more examples you can share of that?
Examples of investors or?
More openness to investment in Black-owned businesses or other businesses.
Well, again, there are a lot of conversations that are taking place now amongst angel investors, private equity firms, big corporations that want to support. I mean, I see different organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, some of the big corporations that are now forming internal programs to support Black-owned businesses, people of color, small businesses. And they're coming up with grants. And it is important, again, that it's not just conversation, and it's not just about creating opportunities for mentoring and consulting. No, there needs to be funding. And those communities, again, if we collectively continue the dialogue, because there are, again, so many people that didn't really understand, and so many still don't understand what the impact of redlining has had on the Black community. When we opened up in the Central District, there were 87% Black people lived in that community owning homes and owning businesses. Now there's less than 15% that was dispersed due to gentrification and redlining because they couldn't access capital. They couldn't utilize even the equity in their homes to advance their businesses or get better education for their kids, a better healthcare. All these things are associated with those disparities that came about through social inequities and systemic racism and lack of access to capital. And again, I hear it more. I'm on the advisory board now for the Restaurant Leadership Conference. When I started going there 7, 8 years ago, I was one of maybe 3 or 4 other African Americans or people of color that I would see at the event. And so even their model now is changed to have a greater focus on people of color, Black-owned businesses, smaller businesses, so that they can be more of assistance in helping them to sustain and grow.
I'm curious, does anybody else have any thoughts on just how we can improve access to capital for all?
Yeah, I mean, diversity was one of the things that my partner and I really wanted to focus on when we started this fund. And And I think we've done pretty well there. I'll talk a little more about it in a minute, but the game business in general, these days almost everyone's a gamer, and yet if you look at the core of the business, it was started by young white guys like me, and so we were not necessarily reflective of the audience today, which is more than 50% female, and very diverse, right? And so we're trying to improve the diversity in the gaming business, and what makes it work, say in my business in the venture world, is for somebody like me to try it and then to have success. And that's what we're seeing with our fund. We've made 42 investments now around the world, and our fund performance is frankly off the charts. It's done incredibly well. Just to pick an example, one of our portfolio companies, Black founder David Ortiz, who Matt and I both worked with back in the day at Microsoft, his company SimWin Sports is announcing today an investment at $100 million valuation, which is we got in a lot earlier than that. So it's good for our investors. It's great for Dave. It's great for Black game developers everywhere. So diversity is something Microsoft's taking very seriously. I know their game business has been pushing hard in that area, and it's something where we need to do more, but we've been able to show that by focusing on it, it's not just something to feel good about. It's something that's great business that can be great for everyone. So
great.
The only thing I would add, I really appreciate the conversation that just happened, and I think there's two things that have come into my mind in all of this, and making sure that as we as a community are doing development and planning and agenda setting and so forth, it's ensuring that people with lived experiences of all different kinds are at the table during every phase of that decision making. I think that helps grow the awareness, that much as what Lewis was talking about, is that I think there's just people are waking up and learning and understanding more, but we've got to get to a point where there's greater understanding and that it actually moves to action. Because I agree. I think even here at Microsoft, I think that has been a transition that we've been making over the last couple of years, is that really focusing in on action. And what is it that we can offer, and what is it that we can really bring to the table to share power, to share decision making, those sorts of things. And I think that's what we need to really make the difference.
Yeah, great. I want to look at sort of some things that have been done during the pandemic to make a difference. Debbie, recognizing that community-based organizations have risen to the challenges that have been created by the pandemic by helping individuals and organizations navigate the opportunities that are available. Can you share some examples of this work?
Yes, happy to. And wondering if my slides can be pulled up here just to highlight some of the work happening in the group that I'm part of, and here hopefully representing well. We do know that our community-based organizations have had a huge role in connecting with small business owners from Black, Brown, and immigrant communities that did not have access to information and all the things that we've already been talking about here. So we have a group in East King County of amazing leaders, and you might have heard from Angie Hinojos earlier from Centro Cultural, one of our members of this group. And I wanted to highlight quickly just a couple of examples. If we go to the next slide, we have one of our partners is the Muslim Community Network Association, and they've created the first Muslim business directory for Washington State. That's huge. They are also looking at a BIPOC business directory for our region as well. And just to get a little bit more personal and give you a sense of how this touches lives, if you go to the next slide, Indian American Community Services reaches out to many of their South Asian business owners, and including many of our hair and beauty salons here in the East Side that are run primarily by women. And they help them apply for loans, access residential rental assistance, even got them and their workers grocery gift cards, because there's so much shame in their community about going to food banks. So that's not an option for many of them. Connected them to vaccine clinics. One of the owners of a salon in Crossroads has a debilitating condition where she needs extensive physical therapy for her arm due to occupational overuse. And she's her family's primary income earner. So this organization is helping her update her marketing brochures, supplies, get her supplies and equipment, set up a social media marketing campaign, the real hands-on technical support and moral and emotional support from a community. And they're able to direct community members who want to be trained in that field, help her business while they're also getting some valuable training. So those are just a couple of brief examples of what's happening in our community-based organizations and how they're really holding such a network together in their communities.
Great, yeah. It's so important to have that community involvement and engagement. Matt, turning to you for a minute, you live in Duval, you're actively engaged in your community. As we've talked about some, the East Side population is growing dramatically. A lot of those individuals have that work from home model where they can live anywhere. From your perspective, what can be done across the East Side to engage residents to become more active in their communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, Don. In Duval, I support the Northwest Arts Center nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that focuses on art programs for everyone in the community and provides a large range of art classes, workshops, and events to support kind of creative culture in the community. And I think one of the challenges is, as we're moving towards recovery, and I think Debbie mentioned this, is the ecosystem is still broken. And part of the ecosystem being broken is, even as maybe these nonprofits are getting some funding, like the Northwest Arts Center, they don't have the teachers they need. They don't have the volunteers they need. And so it's a full ecosystem. And part of that ecosystem means people in the community are going out, seeing these nonprofits and getting back to volunteering, getting back to participating and supporting these vital programs inside the community. And so I think that one of the things the cities can do and the community can do is be more involved in the full ecosystem. And so it always starts with funding, like getting funding to these nonprofits is vitally critical. But beyond funding, it involves things like exposure around, having events in the community, bringing these nonprofits out, getting that exposure, having markets, giving reasons for the community to get back engaged so the ecosystem can grow. Because without the teachers and without the volunteers, these nonprofits really aren't going to survive. And I think the nonprofits still feel like they're alone. And I think the small businesses still feel like they're alone. And so, the support is much easier for the bigger businesses. The support is much easier for anybody that's not a nonprofit effectively. And so really developing these programs is going to be critical, I think, for our recovery.
Anyone else have thoughts just around, how to boost the nonprofit sector in the organizations?
I have a couple thoughts. One, it's interesting to me because I think in a lot of ways what people are saying is that, like, learning to be great as a hybrid person, as a hybrid worker, as a hybrid organization is almost becoming a competitive edge or a differentiator for folks. And I think that even applies to nonprofits as well. And that we've, for nonprofits to be able to capitalize on perhaps a workforce that's has a little bit more flexibility in their day, could increase things like volunteerism at different parts of the day, or board leadership, or even micro volunteering activities that can be done in a virtual environment. I think there's going to be some really interesting creative opportunities that come from this from nonprofit organizations. And I think those that really dive into that and really explore fast, I think will benefit a lot. I also think, I mean, you know, one of the things that we've been acutely aware of for years at Microsoft is just the technology infrastructure within nonprofits is also something that lacks. And, you know, it's something that we've been really focusing on, and I think other companies have been focusing on it more as well, is that nonprofits are a critical, if not the critical in some ways, element of community. They're the connective tissue. And making sure that, you know, we are supporting nonprofit organizations as the professional organizations that they are. And that means technology, that means capacity building, that means being able to pay more than livable wages to nonprofit staff. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us in the philanthropic community to really think about that and think about how are we providing funding to these organizations? How can we be less restrictive on how nonprofits utilize funding so that they can actually build up their capacity to become more of a professional organization and those sorts of things. So it's going to be interesting. To me, it goes back to the first question you asked, is in terms of surprises during the pandemic. And I guess this isn't a surprise. Nonprofits are the ones that held our communities together, whether they were the arts groups, the after-school programs, the healthcare, the senior supports, the Meals on Wheels, like everything. They are the ones that held us together in so many ways. And I think it's something that we need to remember and we need to honor as we move forward.
Definitely. And Debbie, kind of from your perspective, how can we all, kind of our cities, our businesses, our nonprofits, do more to create a spirit of inclusive community that's welcoming to everyone?
I think we've definitely been hearing some of that already, which is great. I think that in part it's the honoring of the thought leadership and the expertise and wisdom that exists in all sectors of our community. And we were just talking about nonprofits. And so often one of the things that happens is, well, we're starting to see more funds coming to nonprofits that are directly connected to our Black and Brown and immigrant-owned businesses and other small businesses in our community. But it's rare that we get asked our opinion on the next economic development strategy plan for a city, or, you know, there are things that we are not invited to. And not only do we want to be at the tables, we want to help build the tables with all of you and other parts of our community, that we want to have representative leadership. It's very important. So I think whenever we can think from a perspective of bridge building, you know, who is most impacted by this situation happening, who has the most potentially to lose, where can we reach out and bring these people into the conversations and co-create agendas together so that we're not feeling like we're an afterthought or have a minor role in something that impacts all of our lives. So I would say those are part of it. And then also borrowing, you know, we have great models. Welcoming America puts out their Welcoming Economies playbook. It's incredible. We have the Seattle's Equitable Development Initiative, and hopefully King County will also be soon passing their proposal to create a King County initiative along those lines as well. So we have models that we can borrow from, innovations, and we have, again, that thought leadership and expertise within our own communities that often go untapped.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, Louis, I just want to turn back to you for a minute. You know, what would you like to see done in terms of sort of helping to build more of those bridges to connect some of the smaller businesses and some of the Black-owned businesses with the rest of the community and the majority business, I guess?
Well, you know, I think back to comment that Ed made early on. You know, when the gaming industry got started, it was a bunch of white guys sitting around developing and in a circle. And I talk about the awareness now, and there are those that are out there saying, how can I help? It starts with, again, understanding what the problem is. There's a saying that when knowledge meets power, those that have the knowledge have not the power. Those with the power have not the knowledge. And when there's an opportunity, like Debbie's saying, to be able to have a seat at the table. One thing comes to mind is an initiative that was put together by Perkins Coie and a couple of the law firms, the Black Boardroom Initiative.
Mhm.
And it was a 7-month program that I, along with other African-American men, signed up for to participate in, be groomed so that we could be positioned to have a seat at the table at some of those boardrooms where in the past it's been, again, a bunch of white guys sitting around making decisions about policy that affect our communities. And now involving people from those communities to give a voice to some of the concerns and challenges that can be addressed. And it wasn't intentional, it was just, we do what we do. And so now having an initiative like that and more people that are aware that there needs to be more people at the table from our various communities and have a voice that can speak to some of the challenges and some of the concerns and have some solutions to present. I think it's going to be good. And I'm, again, I'm optimistic that there's enough people out there now that really want to understand, how can I make a difference? How can I be part of the solution?
Well, and I love the optimism, and I think that's fantastic, and that's what we all need. Sticking with sort of the theme of the sort of overall growth and evolution of the East Side, Jane, I want to turn to you for a minute on just sort of your thoughts on how can community leaders, both private sector and public, be more thoughtful and intentional about efforts to improve our communities when it comes to things such as infrastructure, transportation, affordable housing, and some of those important key issues.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll answer this from the perspective of what we're seeing on the East Side right now, and this unprecedented growth that is happening and attention that is focused in our region and on the 23 cities that we're calling East King County. I think one of the things that we've been really trying to think about is how do we, big we, the community at large on the East Side, how do we come together so that we are developing a vision and a set of strategies and a plan that is cohesive amongst all of East King County. Certainly every community is different and unique, but there are some things that we as a region need to come together on and develop a unified agenda. And it's the old saying, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that is absolutely something that we need to consider and think about right now on the East Side. And it's things like responsible growth. So how are we developing a unified agenda as we go to Olympia every year? How are we thinking about what is the best thing that ought to happen on the East? What are our priorities so that we're not in a position where we are challenging each other, but we are, going and advocating on behalf of all of us. The second piece of that, which is absolutely critical and follows along the discussion we've had today, is that changing who's at the table and making sure that as strategies and agendas are being built, that it is done so in a way that is inclusive of all the different geographies and demographics and races and genders and so forth of the people that live in this community. I think that is critically important. And then doing so in a way that we're also thinking about how do we take this moment of unprecedented growth and pause long enough to think about what do we want our community to be in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, and make sure that we're thinking about that now so that we are building for that future as opposed to what's happening, tomorrow and the next day. I think that's going to be an important element for us as a community. You think about the East Side today, and I think there is a lack of arts and cultural institutions. I think there's a lack of services, or it's hard to find. The cohesiveness is not there in some of those attributes. So I think those are things that we need to think about as we move forward. How are we building for the future that this community really wants to be?
Yeah, and some of that goes towards that. The East Side communities do rank high for livability, but it's kind of looking at kind of the thinking in terms of more equitable services, helping schools to continue to improve and evolve. And as you mentioned, the arts and cultural opportunities on the East Side. What would you like to see? And I open this really to everyone as well. What would you like to see kind of moving forward to have a more kind of equitable opportunity to improve the livability of the communities overall on the East Side?
Yeah, I mean, if I could talk
Go ahead.
a little about it, because I grew up here, I was born here. My parents both moved out here to work for Boeing, and I've seen a lot of change. I grew up in Bellevue and live in Kirkland now. It's such a complicated issue. It's, because I think we want to preserve what we love about this place, right? But we still have to deal with growth. And what does that mean? Or, what do we have to give up to make room for more people? And, I mean, I love that downtown Bellevue has become this, mini, city, skyscrapers. I'm really proud of that, honestly, that's this little town that I remember as being a small place as a kid is now this beautiful big city. But I love that Kirkland's different. I love that Kirkland still has kind of a little small town feel, and they do the little 4th of July parade, and so there isn't like one solution. One city can do one thing, one can do another. In my area where I live, part of the reason I moved out here and others is we just love the trees. We want to be in the trees. And we have our own organization, Finn Hill Neighborhood Alliance, and we try to protect what this neighborhood is. But if we're too greedy about that, in the sense, if we're too selfish about keeping it the way it is, we can't make room for others, right? And so we need higher density. We need more things to be built. But how do you make the trade-offs between those two things? I think it's a complicated issue, and it's one we're going to be navigating for quite a while.
Yep.
Debbie,
it's a great opportunity for this organization, honestly, is this OneEastside, and having more entities like that are pulling people together to have these kinds of discussions, as opposed to one-offs in all the different places. Because you're right, Ed, it's like every community wants to have their own neighborhood feel and their own characteristics, for sure. But when it comes to things like, infrastructure and access to services and density, and what are we going to do about homelessness, and what are we going to do about arts and culture, and these things that don't really have geographic boundaries, how do we ensure those kinds of things, there's a place for communities to come together and actually do regional planning? I think that's going to be the key.
Debbie, what are your thoughts around kind of how to improve the livability of the East Side for everyone?
These are tough questions today. Well, I want to say just a plug for an immediate and concrete part of this, which is our comprehensive plan updates coming up in our cities, and how critical it is that we hear from all parts of our community. So I'm going to be doing my part. I hope all of you will as well, to make sure that we hear from more people than we typically hear from in those processes of community engagement. But I do think, to Jane's point about the visioning, I would love for us to see more spaces, more convening spaces where it's cross-sector, cross-community engagement with one another about why we love this region so much and why we want to stay here and how we can preserve that, not just so that we can be here, but so many of us struggle when we're thinking about our children or grandchildren being able to afford to live here. That's not right. We shouldn't have to break up our families because of those dynamics. And we need to think about that longer term. And I really hope that we can all look at those spaces and each one try to host, if we each just hosted one, think about the amount of people we would touch and the amount of visioning that we can do together, and then point people to those very specific and concrete spaces where they can make an impact and voice their needs and solutions. And I'd like to just share real quickly a portion of resources that we have on our website, Resource Library for Inclusive Economy, for some thought leadership around that, if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Louis, Matt, any thoughts that you might have just around kind of ways you'd like to see the sort of livability of the East Side improved going forward or maximized?
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Louis.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start with, I think a couple of points people have hit, I have concerns about also, which is really the affordability of our communities. And I think that, as we all want to live here and other people move in, a tendency is really to develop out more density in our communities. But for whatever reason, I don't feel like we're developing the density to support that with our arts and culture, with our nonprofits or small businesses. And a lot of the housing is going in for sure. And I think it was Debbie who mentioned it, that is a concern, which is how do our kids live here? Like the affordability, long term is just not here at the moment. And hopefully, I think as we start getting to hybrid and remote workspaces, we can distribute that a little bit more. And some of the smaller communities can become some of, a new Bellevue, as Ed was saying, like, how do these smaller communities evolve a little bit more to support this new remote workforce? It will change the dynamics quite a bit, but I still think affordability has to be one of the largest concerns.
Yeah. Louis, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Matt there. And as long as that's a desired goal, I think it can be achieved. And more times than not, when the planning process is underway, those that are impacted the most are not at the table or don't have a voice at the table. And again, I'm going to remain optimistic that there are more people now that are at that level of awareness that they understand change needs to happen. And enough blaming the victim.
Mm-hmm.
Let's support the victim, those that have been impacted. And again, as we talk about the East Side and the development of it, if there's no intention to make it affordable, it will never become affordable.
That's right.
So let's have those conversations. Let's establish that as a goal and get the right people at the table that can have that voice and have an understanding of what that need is, and then come up with solutions.
Matt, but aside from the affordable housing affordability standpoint, I mean, what do you see in terms of sort of the opportunities and challenges for recruiting employees who can choose to live on the East Side or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think Ed hit on the desire from the company, right? From a company perspective, we are now able to get the best no matter where they're located. And I think that's a really attractive piece. It's been a struggle for a lot of the tech sector before the pandemic to hire in locations. And I think even when you're trying to decide whether you're going to live on the east side or Seattle, there's choices there, right? And people decide that where they're working based on that decision pre-pandemic. I think now remote work and hybrid work is a competitive offer, just like what location you might look at. And so it's very important. And I think the next piece of this opportunity is, what is that at-home workforce? And I think Lewis mentioned how Zelles was able to adapt to some of that at-home workforce. And there's going to be a new need for services and support, community support, cultural support around at-home work. And it is permanent. Like, there is going to be a hybrid workforce. There is going to be people, maybe 50% in the office. There's going to be full remote workforce where people are at home all the time and never go into the office. And the home office is going to change. The home needs are going to change, and the services around that are going to change. And I don't think we're fully supportive of that yet, but there's a lot of opportunities available, both from a technology perspective to a small business perspective, co-office locations, co-location opportunities inside the communities. Even maybe transforming what the local coffee shop is about. Like, there's so many pieces here, and I think these are really the opportunities. And recruiting people has gotten more complicated because really people are now choosing the company more than they're choosing the location. And I actually think that's really good for business.
And so, Ed, just to go back to you for a minute. So along those lines, you talked about your fund and you're investing in companies around the globe, really getting sort of that top talent wherever they may live. How can we as a region utilize that same principle for innovation and collaboration for investment in the future?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. One, I think that what we've done with our fund, with One Up Ventures, it happens to be in the game business, but there's no reason it has to be in the game business. I hope that other people look at what we do as a model to, encourage diversity and create community, in other areas. I think it can be done, and I think if we continue to show good performance with the fund, it'll encourage other people to do the same. So that's one thing I hope. Just kind of a comment, to what Matt was talking about. I know, I think one of the great things about the pandemic is that we can drive again on the roads, so there are some big challenges we were facing pre-pandemic, with traffic and not wanting to become the next LA, that, hybrid work can really, really help us. It can really make our lives better, I think, in a bunch of ways. So I think that what Matt said is exactly right, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. I think we should embrace it, and it's going to solve a bunch of problems for us. So.
And real quick, Ed, just share with us, why has the East Side become such a hub for gaming industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I mean, I didn't really talk about the game business. East Side is, just this region, Puget Sound region, is one of the best places to make video games in the whole world. The game business has been the fastest growing media business for quite a while, growing about 10% year over year. Pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, was growing 20% year over year. It's a $200 billion business and continuing to grow. So we live in kind of the Hollywood of the games business. Us game people, maybe we don't make as much a big a deal about that as the Hollywood people do. So maybe you don't realize you're living in the middle of an incredible game place, but there's 1,000 people working at Bungie down in downtown Bellevue, or they were. They just got acquired for $3.5 billion by Sony. You've got Valve there, which is another multi-billion-dollar company right there in the center of downtown Bellevue. Of course, we have Microsoft, and Microsoft's huge game business. They just did the largest acquisition in the company history. It was a game company. And so that was encouraging to me, so that Microsoft is continuing to grow and invest in that business. And of course, Nintendo, like I said. So, but yeah, the roots of the game business go way back here, run very deep. And I think it's because, you know, we basically had a lot of engineers from Boeing, and you got some very early game companies here. Sierra is an example of a company that was here. Electronic Arts had an office, and then of course, Nintendo and Microsoft. So it's all grown from that. Now we have, yeah, Christina and I think there's about 500 game companies in the local region. And, you know, these days game companies can be 2 people, you know, husband and wife team, you know, up to 1,000 people at Bungie. So working on Destiny. So it's a great business, and it's a business that has a technology aspect and an art aspect, and so we've been able to bring a lot of art people into the community as well. So I think it's had a very positive impact on the region.
Yeah, well, we have just a couple minutes left, so I want to end with Lewis's optimism. I love that, and so just 30 seconds or less. I'm going to have each of you just give us one thing that gives you optimism for the future, particularly focusing on the East Side. So, Lewis, start us off.
Well, just being on this panel today, and the vibe, the good energy, and again, more conversations like this. And maybe, you know, I can get Ed's contact information now and talk to him.
Absolutely.
Get him to invest into this nonprofit that I serve on a board to teach some of the inner city kids how to become gamers and how to learn programming, you know, and make that investment into the community. But again, having an opportunity to network and meet others that have the same vision is optimistic for me. And a lot of good energy here today, a lot of good information, meeting good people, and we come together and make a difference.
Great. Debbie, quickly, just in 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Yep. I would say our people, our communities, and our relationships give me hope.
Great. Jane.
I think that for me, it's this whole conversation, and the word that kept coming up for me is intentionality, and the notion that, you know, we need to be intentional about having all people represented at the table. We need intentionality about creating having a vision about what the future is that we want, and then building it in time. So that's what I'm excited about.
Great. Ed.
Mine's a little funny. One of our portfolio companies happened to be based in Seattle, put out an announcement of their company, and it happened to be all white guys in the picture, and they got beat up. They got beat up in Twitter. They got beat up online. And I was like, that's so great. We're at a time where that's not okay in our business anymore, you know, that the community stepped up and says, no, you need to do better, you know? So I love that.
Great. Matt, close us out, 10 seconds.
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna follow Lewis here, which is I'm just excited that we're able to have these conversations, able to have support from people like One Redmond and Eastside community things to get these conversations going. And so super excited about that, super optimistic, and looking forward to continuing these conversations.
Great. Well, we are out of time, so I want to turn it back over to Christina. I want to thank each of you. It's been a pleasure taking part in this conversation with you. And thank you, Christina, for having me be involved as well.
Absolutely. And a big thank you from me to all of you for not only your insight, but your inspiration and your dedication to our community. Thank you. So as we look to the future of OneEastside, building and sustaining our local economy that is inclusive to all will be achieved by working together to ensure our region is an excellent place to do business, to work, and to live. We will weave that quality of life fabric of our community through economic development. And as many of you know, Stronger Together has been our theme for well before the pandemic. And to support our ongoing efforts, we are launching a capital campaign later this year to bring business, government, education together to resource this work to our community. And before we leave, I want to give another reminder to please help get the word out to our nonprofits about the Give Big Eastside opportunity. We'll be hosting an informational session on March 15th to walk through how nonprofits can participate. And we also encourage everyone here and businesses and individuals to engage in the Give Big Eastside campaign, which will be coming out in May. By donating to our recognized nonprofits, but maybe also in addition to our smaller and less visible nonprofits that are making a difference in our community each and every day. And I want to also make sure that you please share the news about OneEastside Spark far and wide so all our businesses who need help can find it. And as we move forward through to recovery from this lengthy pandemic, remember that we are all in this together. As our businesses navigate this new normal, they will be choosing their own COVID policies for the safety of their staff and patrons. And that will include those that may have compromised immune system. So as Washington State Department of Health so eloquently put it, please be kind and compassionate and respect the rules of the room that you are in. So as I close the program today, I want to go ahead and give a big thank you to all our presenters again. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful, wonderful presentation today. Thank you to our sponsors, our presenting sponsors and founding level investors, Microsoft, the City of Redmond, and Nelson Legacy Group. Our supporting sponsors, Business Health Trust, BHT, and our media sponsors, the Puget Sound Business Journal. And I would like to also thank the team at Tenacious Ventures for another outstanding production here today. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next event.